Hey, good evening, everyone. This is Lowman02. I'm going to do a quick deck tech with a deck that I've been working on for a little while to try to improve upon. And really, the font of this deck, which is a Scapeshift in 100 Card Singleton, is some play experience I've had against stompy-based decks. I think stompy colors are actually relatively strong. I think it's chiefly due to the green in them because there's a lot of card selection, plus there's the ever-present ramp, which allows you to fix your mana. I also really enjoy the fact the color or the deck itself is two colors. So as you'll see, I mean, and by the name, you could probably guess that we are a Scape Shift deck. Which, for those of you not familiar with some very common modern tactics, Scape Shift is used in combination with cards like Primeval Titan and Valakut, if I can find it in the pile over here, to combo opponents out and essentially lightning bolt them to the face with your mountains after you've reached 5 total in play. So, I saw a Stompy. I saw that the deck was very good, and I kind of wanted to build my own variant of this deck. But if you know anything about me or you've seen some of the decks I kind of play, I like to I don't like to play a pure mid-range strategy. I like to take the things that I think are great about mid-range, which are the value creatures, the life gain, the flexibility of search for land and creatures, and have some sort of way to close out a game rapidly. Like you'll have seen with my Rexer deck, we have cards like Living Death or Recurring Nightmare. They combo very well with Enter the Battlefield effects. So what we've tried to do here is really build a deck that has a lot of cards that have high synergy with the mana ramp that is intrinsic to this deck. I think it plays pretty much almost every efficient means of getting land out of the deck that it can. As you can see, very land heavy deck. We're playing 41 lands. We have a total of 19 basic lands in the deck, which give us some pretty good options in sideboard, which we'll get to eventually, in Blood Moon and Magus of the Moon. But as you look at the main, 41 lands, very heavy land deck. It's running a couple of land combos. So we'll start off with Dryad Arbor. Obviously you look over here and you see that we have Green Sun Zenith, Cord to a lesser extent, but we can get the Dryad out of the deck relatively easily with Green Sun Zenith and ramp to 2 mana on turn 1. Ancient Tomb, I like running this card. This may viably be, I think it's Forgotten Temple or Temple of the Lost Ancients. There's another card that essentially says, this land does nothing for you until after you hit 5 lands, and then it gives you 2 mana. I find Ancient Grudge just more flexible in the early parts of the game. It can get you into a quick Wood Elves or, Search for Tomorrow if you haven't found it turn 1, or Harrow, or Cultivate. A lot of cards that have 2 without other color, with 1 green colorless requirement in them, and or 4 drops that have 2 colorless requirements or more. So I found Ancient Tomb is very strong in the deck. We play all the available fetch lands that find red and or green mana. And you'll kind of see some of the value in that. I always support playing the fetch lands, almost regardless. But when you have cards like Titania, Protector of Argoth in the deck, you'll find that they gain a lot of value when you're playing. Plus, at its heart, this is a ramp deck, ramp combo deck. And as much as possible, we have a very high land count, but in a lot of ways, the deck plays as if it does not because you put lands into play so rapidly that the virtual advantage that you gain off your top deck is extremely high. You'll see we have Cinderblade, obviously combo piece with the Valakut as well because it is a mountain. Dark Depths as well as the Thespian Stage combo. They combo up very well with cards like Primeval Titan, and then Crop Rotation. You'll note I think the combo is extremely strong. Don't get me wrong, but we don't have as much flexibility as you have in, let's say, a junk build to find it because it becomes a little more difficult to find your Primeval Titan. Not a lot more so because green is mostly what does that for you. But you don't have available at your disposal cards like Knight of the Reliquary that also enable that. And one card that I play with and you won't see in our 2 spot is Sylvan Scrying. I do play Crop Rotation. I think the card is extremely strong and it combos now with a lot of our other cards. But Sylvan Scrying, I just don't think is an all-star. For 2 mana, it's a very powerful effect and it's consideration. And maybe by the time I play this, if I do decide to play it on this Saturday, you'll see Sylvan Scrying in there. It's been one that's very close on the edge for me. All right, going through Firelit Thicket, just good fixing. Game Trail, again, good fixing. We're in two colors. And one of the things you'll commonly hear in videos like this is that 2 colors is sometimes harder to fix than 3 colors. And I think to a certain extent that's true because there are just a lot less two-color lands available. When you start jumping into three colors, your requirements across the spectrum of the three colors you're playing generally becomes it reduces the total number that you require in each color. So as you see, we're much more heavily based in green. We use red mostly for 2-for-1 and or very efficient removal effects, as well as sweepers for the early game. Because what you're looking at here, we do run a decent amount of creatures in 27. That's not a lot though. And a lot of our creatures are really just ramp pieces. They're getting us to our end game, which as you can see is stuff like Omnath, Locus of Rage, Primeval Titan, Inferno Titan, Titania. To us, we're saying like mid-range creatures like Thragtusk, but for the most part, our creatures aren't phenomenal on their own. They're really just buying us time. So we have these red effects in here to really sweep away decks like, White Weenie, you know, mono red to an extent. And when you start looking at our creatures as well, they also are built to do the same thing. We have cards like Yavimaya Dry, which we'll happily block with. Yavimaya Elder, we benefit from blocking with. Kitchen Finks, the same thing. So what you'll see is a lot of cards that gain us life in the early game in order to get us to our very powerful late game. Which, as we stated, is a combination of Scapeshift, Primeval Titan, Titania, Protector of Argoth, or Omnis Locus of Rage. And when we say Primeval Titan and Scapeshift, really what we're talking is Valakut and the mountains that are in the deck, and or the Dark Depths combo to get a 2020 Merit Lage into play. So continuing down the lands, we have Grove of the Burn Willows. I figure with the ability of this deck to find land very easily, Punishing Fire is a very strong card in this deck for smaller creature removal against White Weenie. This can just wreck shop. As you'll find, you get a hit on mana very fast. All right, so Homeward Path. You know, Typically not a card I run in my decks, but this deck is extremely prone to control magic effects. If you look across our main, we have cards like Hull Breach, which help against it because it allows you to. It says 2-for-1 on it for an artifact and or an enchantment if the opponent has one of both in play. And we have cards like Reclamation Sage. But as far as the main goes, these are the only two. Well, correction, we have one more. We have Primal Command, which could do that if it's a enchantment based control effect. But outside of that, we really don't have a lot of means to stop those effects, like bribery, etc. So Homeward Path does a very good job of that. And when we get to the board, and you can probably already see them here. You see we have cards like Brand, which, because of the mana production of this deck, I think is a fine card for the sideboard because I can cycle this off if it's irrelevant, or if the opponent has played a bribery on me and got my Primeval Titan, I get it back for free, which is pretty powerful. Raging Ravine, fine manland and mana fixer. Rootbound Crag, mana fixer. More fetch land, Stomping Ground works well with the Valakut. It is also fixing. Taiga, same thing. Thespian Stage, we already hit up. Valakut, if you're not familiar with this card, all it basically says is once you have 5 mountains in play, when you play your 6th, you can do 3 damage to target creature or target player. So if you're familiar with the combo that involves Scapeshift and this land, if I put Scapeshift, if I class Scapeshift and I have 7 lands, 7 lands, and I put 6 mountains plus Valakut into play, it will do 3 damage for each of those 6 mountains that I put into play, because Valakut doesn't count as one. Because they simultaneously entered the battlefield, and there are 6 simultaneously, each one counts towards that. So that's really the combination you're looking for. So as we'll show you a couple games after we get done doing the deck tech, and you'll see, unfortunately you'll see one opponent scoop to it, but if you could have seen it, it would have meant loss to the opponent. So obviously 6 is a sweet spot if you're trying to hit 18 damage. This deck can go far and above that. At the end of the day, your maximum capability to do damage, let's count it out real fast. We have 8 mountains here, basic mountains, and we have 3 additional mountain lands, or lands that count as mountains over here. So 11 times 3, we can do a total of 33 damage with Valakut at a maximum. So, as you see us play our games out, you'll see that we generally stop once we have 1 red mana, maybe 2. But keep in mind, the only cards that actually are required more than 1 red mana are Inferno Titan and Omnath, Locus of Rage, either of which generally when they're casting and if they stay in play and resolve, like you're going to win. So, once we're getting to those 2 cards, and really it's more so Omnath. Inferno Titan, I think, is a card that's replaceable in this deck right now. Omnath, I'm a pretty huge fan of because it combos out well with Scapeshift. And it combos out well with just the raw ability of this deck to put lands into play. And it's essentially wrath proof because I don't know many folks who want to wrath something that's going to cause 12 to 15 damage to them when it dies. So it is powerful in this deck, even if it was, for the longest while, the very last pick in cube draft. I kind of think this is a good home for the guy. And I'm pretty excited to play him, in this deck. I've cast him a couple times, once against White Weenie, which is a match we'll show you, and it was frankly it was gross. And we even get to do the Scapeshift combo with it, and the card is actually very powerful, even if it looks like a massive clunker at 7 mana with extremely hard to fix casting cost. All right, so we do have the one by Wasteland in here. We cut Tectonic Edge. This deck is not really an LD deck, and if we can just get rid of one or a very specific land, we can tend to find our Wasteland. And keep in mind, we have Titania to buy this effect back if need be. Okay, so creature search. Like I've talked about in some of the open forums that are on MTG Salvation with the rest of the 100 card community, I think what green is really most powerful for is not per se its creatures. Its creatures are great, but it's its ability to find its creatures. So as you see, we have Summoner's Pact in a ramp deck. This tends to be irrelevant because 9 times out of 10 what we're finding is this big old lug right here, Primeval Titan, and we're going to have 2 more lands regardless. This is typically what you're using this card for. A very powerful card, and can just turn games on a dime. Green Sun Zenith. This card varies. I rarely cast this thing for 6 mana or 7 total mana to find a Primeval Titan. Normally I'm finding some sort of interim card to get to Primeval Titan or to get more mana. Or, as it often turns out, I'm just getting a Dryad Arbor to get one more land into play very early. Court of Calling, newer add to the deck. So, this deck's gone through a couple of gyrations in how I wanted to have it play out. At one point, I had at the top end, as opposed to Inferno Titan, a Wildfire and Burning of Xinye package that it just didn't happen. I didn't like it. Again, some matchup is very powerful and it maybe is a board consideration, but it's not really what the deck's about. Even if it does combo out, pretty well with cards like Omnath, Locus of Rage, and Titania, Protector of Argoth. Keep in mind, it would need to be both in play because if you're casting either of those cards, it'll kill Titania and all of the elementals she makes. But I think more search effect with the raw amount of mana this deck can build, and we'll go through it. I mean, basically you'll see it's just straight mana, straight ramp. Really very focused on the win cons we've already kind of talked, but having the ability to find that is powerful. All right, so Firebolt, 2 for 1. We can make 5 mana very easily in this deck. Forked Bolt, more questionable, but 2 for 1. 2 for 1 potential off a burn spell is not bad in my book. Lightning Bolt, just the best burn spell ever printed. Birds, just good ramp, and it flies, and it can just produce any sort of mana that we want. And, you really can't beat that art. It's just an awesome card. Crop Rotation, already kind of talked this card. Finds any land in the deck. This is a land-based deck. Really, I don't want to say it plays on like legacy lands, and in some ways it does, though, because it has similar win cons. But, it very much so relies on its mana base to do the winning for it. Exploration, a little more questionable on this one, but we have the ability to find a lot of lands with cards like, Kodama's Reach, Nissa's Pilgrimage, and then I believe we have, Cultivate as well. So we have a lot of ways to put lands into our hand, as well as the battlefield. So, and in the early game, this can just speed you up so much that it's very hard for the opponent to come back from. All right, Jiraga, Tree Speaker. Just makes a lot of mana fast. You'll note that when you get to the 2 spot, we don't have like kind of the analogous card you see with this one, which is I can think of his name, Rofellos, Llanowar Emissary. He's not in the deck. Mainly because we don't, we play quite a few Forest, but the card is very easy to remove, and I don't really care for him as a 2 mana investment because what I'm looking to do is not. So I'm making a lot of mana with this deck, but I don't per se want to make it with my creatures. If that kind of makes sense to you. So, Jiraga is fine at 1 because the relative investment in him is relatively small, but I want more cards that get lands into play because I don't want to draw lands off the top. I want to put them into play with my spells, and I need to have a bunch of them because the way that I win with this deck is Scapeshift and Primeval Titan, off of the Valakut and or the Thespian Stage Dark Depths combo pieces. So moving down, Miri's Guile. This deck shuffles a lot of ways to search, tutor, a lot of fetch lands. This is just a strong card in here. It's essentially the poor man's Sensei's Divining Top, until hopefully that card becomes legal in the format. Veteran Explorer. So odd choice here. So the reason I really selected this guy is because it gives us a lot of flexibility to choose when we want to put 2 additional basics into play. Now, keep in mind this is a parallel effect with your opponent. So when this thing dies, it will also put 2 basic lands into play for them as well if they have 2 basics in the deck. Because we play a lot of sweeping effects like Pyroclasm, like Fire Spout. I thought this was a very strong add. Because generally speaking, I feel like this deck can do more than a lot of the mid-range decks can with its mana. I just think it goes over the top of those strategies. Worldly Tutor, again, just a creature search effect that is card disadvantage, but finds you that 1 card you need in the deck. So why these effects I think are so important is because oftentimes in ramp, you can find that, you get to 10 or 12 mana, very fast. Like, as you'll see in some of the games this deck plays, it's turn 3 and we have 6 lands in play and a Lotus Cobra and a Primeval Titan. So, what you need, though, is you need the ability to find the things that end you the game once you have that kind of mana. So you don't want to get into a big mana dead-end draw, which I think decks like this, if they're not built, very carefully, can get to. And you also, when you're playing a deck like this, need to understand that that's a possibility, and based upon your keep, what the risks associated with it are. So Punishing Fire talked it. We do have the associated combo piece with our land, Grove of the Burn Willows. Pyroclasm, just a good clear. Explore, fine card. Ramps you 1. Essentially, the green, poor man's Time Walk. And a pretty strong card. When you're running 41 lands, the chances of you getting to play 2 lands in a turn are pretty high with this. Farseek, just more ramp. Lotus Cobra, so very strong card in the deck. One of the few mid-range cards that actually can beat, but also just tends to produce a lot of mana. When you have, probably like, half your deck are effects like Farseek, this card is just an all-star and makes a lot of mana for you. Nature's Law, better version of Farseek, obviously only Forest, but it comes into play untapped. Overgrown Battlement. So I'm a huge fan of cards like this because, when you have the aggro matchup, there's not a ton of cards that are green, outside of like cards like Feed the Clan, which are a spell that I'm not going to get a recurring effect from, that gain you life in the 2 spot. Now, you may be saying, well, hey, Loman, this doesn't gain you life. And you're right, it doesn't, but it's a 0/4 defender that will also synergize with the strategy that I'm playing. This card right here essentially does gain me life. So if I'm playing against White Weenie or Mono Red and, they're committing to attacking me, with their Goblin Guide or whatever they have in play, it essentially fogs that Goblin Guide. It forces them to use a burn spell out of their hand, which if you recall the deck tech we talked, when we talked Mono Red, when they're spending burn cards on your creatures, they're essentially it might as well be discard almost for them. At least it's better than life gain for them, but at the same time, it's also taking them away from the focus of that which their strategy, or the focus of their strategy, which is, to as rapidly as possible, convert their cards into the effect of you having 0 life. The cards like this tend to force their hand and force them to, utilize them on something like this, a 0/4 for 2 mana. Which, if we can fog, a 2/1 haste and, suck down, a 2 mana 3 damage removal spell or a burn spell, I think that's a good card. And, hey, at the end of the day, it ramps, and we do have I believe 2 more cards that combo with it to make it ramp for more than 1. All right, Rampant Growth. Yep, it's full art, but it says, hey, find a basic land and put it into play tapped. Secure a Tribal Holder, find a basic land, put it into play tapped. Also fogs down attackers, so it's like a Rampant Growth on steroids, essentially. Sylvan Caryatid. This card right here is great. So Defender Hexproof does combo out with our Overgrown Battlement. Has the added proviso of Hexproof, which is awesome because it can block those 2 power creatures, and you have no worry of it getting burned down. So it keeps you alive a little bit longer, and it also ramps you up 1. Sylvan Library. Again, we talked Miri's Guile. This is Miri's Guile on steroids. Just a great card. Allows you to pull them off the top. And with the amount of life gain you'll see we have in this deck, if you're not facing like a very hyper aggro deck, you oftentimes have the flexibility to draw quite a bit of, take a few cards off the top, because it's a hard effect to get in green and red. 3 visits. Again, it's basically the same card as Nature's Lore, just printed for the Portal 3 Kingdom cards, and then re-released, I believe, on MED4, on MTGO. Very strong card. Wall Roots, kind of, the analogous effect to our Overgrown Battlement, complements with it very well. Is also a 0/5, which, it does a lot, goes a long ways to stop beats, and it also ramps you by 1 mana when you cast it. Hull Breach. So as I said, I like to have ways of answering odd permanents. And this right here, answers your enchantments and your artifacts, and it also is has a 2-for-1 advantage as a card, which is very powerful, I think, in this format. Cultivate. Okay, pull 2 basics out of your deck, put 1 in play, tap, put 1 in your hand. Very strong card. Fierce Empath, again, a creature tutor to really define this big old lug right here, or really any of these 3 cards, depending on, maybe this got Swords to Plowshare, etc. But I think you need a lot of effects like this in order to help decks like this work consistently. Harrow, very, very strong card, combos out well with Titania and Protector of Argoth, and it's also, I believe, an instant. It's harder to tell with, yeah, it's an instant. So you can use this as Wasteland protection as well. Or you can do it, during an opponent's turn when they're tapping out or end step, and just odd times for them if they're casting things on your end step. Just a very powerful card. Kodama's Reach. One moment. I think we're freezing up here a little bit. Kodama's Reach. Same thing as Cultivate. It basically says the same exact thing, except for it has the proviso of Arcane. But we're not really exploiting Arcane. We don't have any Splice cards in here. Okay, Nissa Vastwood Seer. She's great. You pull a land out of your deck. We very easily get to 6 lands. She converts into a Planeswalker. If you, +1 her, you're either pulling lands off the top and putting them directly into play untapped, or, you're pulling more cards into your hand. So, very strong card in this deck. This is Pilgrimage. This essentially says the same thing as both Kodama's Reach and Cultivate, except it has the proviso and is stronger due to the fact that if we have Spell Mastery, which is also not hard for this deck to get, as you can see, we run a lot of spell effects inside the deck. You can draw 2 lands and put them in your hand, and then put 1 into your into play tapped. A correction to last. I believe these are basic lands right here. So that's one thing that works against Nissa's Pilgrimage is it's only forests. Still very, very strong. As this is a heavily green-based deck, and you can see we have many, many forests. It works more powerfully than the other 2 cards do in this deck because of the spell count. Rex Age, just a good way of dealing with enchantments and artifacts. I think it's just almost a requisite for decks like this. Search for Tomorrow, on turn 1, this is an all-star. If you cast it, turn 3, it's still fine. It's essentially a more expensive version of cards like Nature's Lore, Explore, or 3 Visits. All right, Wood Elves, same kind of thing. Basically a more expensive version, but you also get a 1/1 body, so it's slightly stronger than cards like Search for Tomorrow if you are casting it on turn 3. Search is, I think, more powerful if you're casting it turn 1. Corsair Crewfix, anytime we're able to purify our draw by taking any of the lands off the top of our deck and putting them into play, that's great. And this has the added benefit of gaining us life whenever we do that. Yavimaya Dryad, I love this card. Very good card. Does not bring the land into play untapped like Wood Elves does. But, the added proviso of Forest Walk plus the 2/1, which gives it more potential of trading, is very strong. All right, so the next one, Yavimaya Elder, also very strong. So this helps us, fog down opponents' attacks. Possibly can draw us a card for investing the 2 mana into it, and we'll always pull 2 lands out of our deck unless there's like a card that disables us from searching our library. So just very strong. Fire Spout, same thing. So the deck does not have a lot of ability to block flyers. Actually, it can't. It just can't block flyers. So this card kind of gives you some outs to smaller flyer strategies. Typically, by the time they're getting to cards like Sphinx, Consecrated Sphinx, Ojutai, this deck, once our deck playing those kind of cards gets to 5 mana, which, I generally assume is going to take 5 turns. Maybe they get lucky and draw a Signet and do it in 4. But that's also saying that they're going to tap out to do it. I think we're going to be at like 6, 7, 8, 9 mana or more, which is going to put us in very good stead to use, I think, our more powerful effects than those 2 cards to end the game very rapidly. So, the deck does not, like I said, does not play around flyers very well. Fire Spout is one of the cards available to it that gives you a little bit of reach against that strategy. Kitchen Finks, hey, 2 life, well, correction, 4 life by the time this card finally goes away. And a 3/2 body is just, it's good exchange rate. Art Explosive Vegetation, strong card, 2 lands out, 4 mana, pretty efficiently costed, and, it's just going to purify your draw, and it's going to get you to a point where, your power plays like Scapeshift and Primeval Titan can just happen. Oracle Moldiah, again, an investment card, but very strong. So anytime that you can take lands off the top of your deck and make your draw more relevant, I don't see why you would not want to be doing that. Skyshroud Claim. So this is a great. I don't see this card oftentimes played. I think it's like condemned as a commander card. I've seen Explosive Vegetation, and maybe that's because it was in Standard, I think, recently. This card is 10 times better than Explosive Vegetation. If you read it ostensibly, they do the same thing, but this card right here does not bring them into play tapped. So really, you're spending 2 mana, which is the same rate as something like Rampant Growth, to get 2 lands into play untapped. It's essentially like, a better version of Nature's Lore once you have the mana to cast it. I think it's a very strong card, and I'm surprised at how little I see this thing played. All right, Garruk Wildspeaker. Again, very strong with the strategy. Also allows you to have some mid-range protection against decks that they get an early advantage against you, because a 3/3 is generally good against decks like White Weenie, Mono Red Aggro, stuff like that. It buys you a little bit of time, and it also ramps you very hard. Natural Order. Hey, this is pretty much ubiquitous with green. I think you're very hard pressed unless you're playing 3-color to not play this card in a green deck. And this is no different. Again, like we said, we want to maximize our ability to find our win cons, which is chiefly Primeval Titan and the lands really that it finds. And this just does that for you. So, Natural Order tends to win games. Just play it intelligently, and as you see in one of the games we play after this, this card, gets us a Primeval Titan on like something like turn 3, and we end up with like 6 lands, a Lotus Cobra, and the Dark Depths combo in place. It's just like, this card can do some unfair things very rapidly. Obstinate Baloth, discard is not completely not a thing that could happen, but really why we play this guy is because he can take a beating, he can hold a lot of beats off, and he gains us 4 life. So he just really gives us a lot more range in the deck, and, he's not that impressive a card. 4 mana for a 4/4, is an efficient rate, but really it's the 4 life, and it's just what he does to the battlefield when he comes in. So just a great card. I think he's a good card in a deck like this, where we can easily cast him turn 3, possibly 2. But generally, turn 3, we can expect to be casting this guy. I think that's pretty reasonable with this deck. Scapeshift, this is really, it should go over here with Primetime because it is an all-star in this deck. If you can resolve this thing and not have something like, a Mindlock Orb in play or an Aven Mind Sensor come down, you're going to win. Unless you have just happened to draw all of your mountains, you're going to win. It ends the game. All right, Bloodbraid. Interesting card. This is more of a mid-range, kind of like, value card, but, because of all the ramp we have in here, we decided to put her in here. Sometimes she just finds a Harrow, sometimes she finds a Reclamation Sage, sometimes a Search for Tomorrow, but she generally finds something that enables us to do more powerful things the next turn. So she's fine in here. I don't think she's at her best. I think this card's at its best, in more of a mid-range strategy, where it can find, more threats. I think typically in here what you can expect it to find is more ramp, is chiefly what you'll get with it. But having that, plus a 3/2 body that attacks the turn it comes in is pretty darn good. You can't complain about that. Huntmaster, hey, we kind of bowed to the life gain on this guy. Also just a good card. I mean, you're getting 4 power for 4 mana. You gain 2 life. And if they don't decide to kill this thing, or they can't play something, or you don't have anything to do, you can just get more value off it. So it's a decent mid-range card that kind of holds the board down and buys you a couple turns, so you can find what you need to find to win the game and close it out. Xenagos, so this card is great because, it plays into itself. If you have a low creature count, which, obviously we're not running a ton of creatures, but if you have a low creature count, you can just beat them down. And once, you get to a point that you have 2 or maybe 3 of these satyrs in play, you can just make a whole host of mana. So really, a good card in the deck, but he also, he's kind of a dual purpose. So he shores up the early game because really you're casting this thing, probably turn 3. Turn 4 maybe, but turn 3 is not a lucky draw to be casting this guy because there's just so much ramp in the deck. Um, and he can beat for a couple turns, force the opponent to go on the defensive, and then when the opponent starts doing more powerful mid-range things, you can hold back with your 2/2s, and then you can eventually make enough mana that you're casting something like an Omnath, a Locust of Rage, or an Inferno Titan that just tends to end games. All right, next one, Solemn Simulacrum. So, I had been out of Magic for many years. When I came back around 2010, cards like this and Primeval Titan, I think it was like 2010 to 2012, were pretty ubiquitous in the ramp deck that just, tended to eat all of the mid-range decks that were in the format at the time. And this card right here is so innocuously amazing. So you look at the 4 mana cost on this guy, and in a deck like this, 4 mana is not difficult. It's turn 3 range, and you look at its ability to take you from essentially the your turn 4 to turn 6 on the drop of a hat. Because this guy comes in, he's already ramped you 1 to 5 mana. You know, during the opponent's turn, if they are, let's say, an aggro deck or a mid-range deck, and they're an attacking deck, you've already drawn your card for turn 5 off this guy, and fogged their attack, so you didn't take damage. And then the following turn, you are in turn 6. So, in a lot of ways, I look at this guy, and in the matchups that we're concerned about, due to our lower creature count, this guy really is, by the definition I kind of just gave, a time walk in a lot of ways. And he's letting us get to, our cards like Prime Time, our cards to a lesser extent like Inferno Titan, which is a fine card, but like I said, I'm not, as sold on this guy. I think there's probably, this maybe should be a Woodland Bellower just in case we draw that before we draw something like Fierce Empath, and then it converts into that. But I'm not sure because this guy just does so much more for you when he comes into play, as opposed to like a Woodland Bellower, which well, albeit it has the same power, it doesn't get a lightning bolt off, or not even a lightning bolt, Chandra's Fury, or arc lightning, if you will, off the turn it comes into play, and gets that every time it attacks. Plus, is pumpable, but this card just has a lot of gives you a lot of ounce to like just winning matchups from very very far behind. Whereas if this was a card like Woodland Bellower, you know, it would get you a prime time in hand, that turn, but you're really not going to win with it until 2 additional turns down the road. Because after you cast the lands you get, which if you're that behind, you're probably looking to get something like, these two guys right here, the Dark Depths and the Thespian Stage. With them coming to play tapped, you're not looking to win that until the turn after that, and really probably 3 turns after, because you're likely going to wait after they're untapped until the opponent's end step, because the creature will come into play without haste, and you don't want to open it up to instant and sorcery speed removal that exiles. So jumping into the 5 drops, Thragtusk, hey, this guy needs to be in here. He just gains you a bunch of life. He blocks something twice. Um, just a great card. It's an amazing card in this format. Primal Command. So this is a card I hadn't thought about in a long time. And honestly, when I rediscovered this thing, the Command series, really, even though I tend to play a lot of one of them very often, and that would be the whiny blue player Cryptic Command. Which I think everyone tends to know and dread, and maybe some love it. But this guy right here, when I found him again, it really stood out to me as being a card that was very needed in this deck. And the only reason I really found this card is I was looking for a decent 5 drops. And Plow Under initially came to mind, but then I thought, I don't really want to be just destroying people's lands. There's a lot of shuffle effects in this format, and I don't think it's really going to realistically fog someone's draw step for 2 turns unless I'm playing against like pure aggro who doesn't have like much library manipulation. But then you know, but then if I'm playing it against aggro in that way, it's really just a win more card because they're gonna already have deployed their threats and then just draw their lands off the top. So am I really time walking them? Maybe, but I just didn't think it was good enough. And then I found this gem right here, and really the options we're looking at on it are the gain 7 life, come from behind, and then draw our creature. And typically that is going to be your prime time. However, I don't think it's completely moot that we can put a permanent on the top of the owner's library. So there is still is the half of a plow under, but the flexibility this thing offers is very amazing. And it can also do some kind of silly things like and I've never done this, but I mean, I guess you could put like a Dark Depths and Thespian Stage back into your deck and find it again if you have an active Prime Time. By shuffling your library back in or your graveyard back into your library. But like I said, typically, you're gonna want to gain a life. You're gonna want to find the creature. I think the most common other play on this card would be put a non-creature permanent on top of the library, and then search our library for a creature. I think those are probably the most common ones you'd see. Um, okay, so Titania, Protector of Argoth. I love this card. The first time I saw this thing, I fell in love with it. I was like, how do I break this thing? And in Commander, I think it's probably a bit better. Because you have cards like Light from the Loam and cards like Crucible of Worlds that just allow you to repeatedly trigger this effect. But when I got this deck together and I initially did like the Wildfire Burning of Jinye concept, I didn't think of this creature right here. What were really I kind of play tested with those two cards and I wasn't impressed by them. They didn't do as much as I wanted them to do for me. And when I opted to take them out, I had to look for some additional threats that would work very well in this deck with kind of the Scapeshift theory and synergize with it. And, I came back to her and I was like, well, I think actually this may be a very viable deck for a card like Titania because if we are Scapeshifting, and given this is kind of a win more concept, but keep in mind, you don't have to Scapeshift at 7 or 8 lands. You can Scapeshift on a lot less and easily put into play, 30 power 30 power worth of creatures. And possibly with the Scapeshift, get your combo like Thespian Stage or Dark Depths. And we do have just a ton of fetch lands available to us. That was kind of my thinking involving it. Plus, although it is a legend, the kind of cool thing about it is that the turn it comes into play, we get an impact out of this card. Um, and that being said, if someone wants to Caracas this thing, there's still a 5/3 in play, and you're still going to have to deal with it. Not to mention, you kind of look over to the very very top end of the curve, other than the X spells, the Omnath. We're kind of looking at a similar theory. Now, keep in mind one interesting synergy between this card and this card, that I didn't notice until I started really considering how I wanted to build the top end and build the threat package is that both of them make elementals. Now, I mean, Titanias are going to be 5/3s, Omnaths are going to be 5/5s. But keep in mind, Omnath reads, anytime an elemental is put into or dies, so put in your graveyard, or just put in your graveyard, um, you're going to do 3 damage to target creature or target player. So Titania's elementals and Titania herself actually count towards Omnath's proviso for damage. So if you ever do happen to get both these cards into play at once, and both obviously do play pretty well with Scapeshift. On one half, Titania gets more 5/3s into play because you sacrifice all the lands, and Omnath, upon the backside of Scapeshift resolving, it is very synergistic because you're putting 5 or 6 lands into play, and that's 30 power worth of 5/5s that at that point are essentially wrath proof because essentially you've kind of built another version of Scapeshift or another version of Valakut rather. Um, so that kind of covers the top end. The only other we have a 6 drop here. And this is renewal. Really, what got me on this is it was the 7 life plus 3 lands. So you know I thought at first maybe this was a win more card because of how expensive it was, but I've just found it the 7 life is really relevant a lot of times. It's a 30 or life total, starting life total, and you're getting 3 lands out of your deck. Which this deck generally always has something to do with its mana. It rarely leaves its mana fallow. And the more we can get out of the deck, the better we can draw. Is kind of the entire theory behind it. And as you kind of saw with the creature tutor package we have available, if we can find one of those, generally it spells us winning the game. All right, so real quick before we jump into the matches, I want to just jump over to the sideboard for what we developed here. So if you look at this deck, and like I told you before, my sideboarding theory is you need to build sideboards that are good against things that will habitually beat you. So with that in mind, control is what gets this thing. I mean, if you look at it, like permission can just wreck this deck. It can set up some very bad turns for you. Also, we have cards like Brand. Brand, it cycles the worst, but in the best, it allows you to gain control of all the permanents you own. Pyroblast, Blow to Metal Blast, that just counter spells, blue base spells or counter spells. Grafdigger's Cage, Relic, the Unverdex, Reanimator style strategies. These are just great against. Ancient Grudge, gets a Batterskull, gets a Wormcoil Engine, gets rid of some peskier artifacts. Vexing Shusher, counter magic protection. Blood Moon and Magus the Moon, some of your decks, your mid-range value decks that just stretch the mana base too much, or Reanimator that stretches the mana base too much. This can just stop, and we don't need to win with Valagate. We can just beat someone to death with with this thing if their mana base is so greedy they can't do anything else. Price of Glory. So this is another anti-counterspell, anti-instant speed card. Basically just says, hey, you're not going to counter my stuff, and if you want to, go on ahead, but you're going to sacrifice each land you tap to do it. Choke. You've probably seen this one. It just says, hey, your islands that are tapped are not untapping, buddy. City of Solitude. You got to be careful on how you play this, depending on what you bring in, because, I mean, cards like Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast, well, they can hit permanents, are generally designed to get counter spells. But this just says, you're never going to counter anything I do, and you can't activate any abilities. And that includes your lands, that includes your creatures, that includes everything. You just cannot activate abilities. And one of the odd things about this is it's also it also includes mana abilities. So your creatures that have mana abilities will not activate either, which is kind of odd, but this is an older card from Vision. So Crosang Grip. This is really in here to get humility, as it is a Primeval Titan-based deck. And, well, we could randomly search into a full Valakut kill combo. That's fairly difficult. So this card, what it does for you is just gets rid of humility, so you can win with your bigger creatures. It will. Boil, kind of a similar thing to Choke. We don't like to see blue decks. This deck does not have an easy time against blue decks. So cards like Price of Glory, Choke, Boil, City of Solitude, to a lesser extent Crosang Grip, because generally blue is paired with white, and then Red Elemental and Pyroblast and Vexing Shusher really complement the whole anti-control strategy this deck has going on. Let's have a Miser Sudden Demise. This is just good. A really good card against like mono white decks, mono red decks. We only run one red creature in the whole deck. Well, correction. I guess we run a couple. We have the Huntmaster, we have the Bloodbraid Elf, we have the Xenagos, the Reveler. But this card is really just it's phenomenal against like the low range, low flying, mono colored aggro decks. This could be. I could see this card being Bonfire of the Damned. I think that is arguably a stronger card, but I think in this deck, like, you want to have this, and a 100 card as well. Like, when you're playing 100 card, oftentimes you're either not going to see it, or, if you start with in the opener and you're kind of playing with it, or you're playing it in your game 2, maybe you've lost game 1 or won game 1, but you brought this in, it'll help inform keeps, because like I've said before, I think it's very. Sometimes you have to, but I mean, I think it's tough to play around the top deck. And I think if you're banking on your top deck, to be something that specific, you're not probably playing for success, or maybe you need to relook your build. I think the card's very strong though, because when you start like looking at it like mono-colored or mono threat colored decks, like for instance like Dion Mag's zombie deck, the mono red decks in the format, or like White Weenie, that card can just wreck them. Like, you're just like, hey, I'm going to play Earthquake, and all of my stuff's going to live, all your stuff's going to die. It's essentially Bonfire if you play it against the right deck. Just strong, very strong card. Okay, so what we're going to do right now is we're going to jump into a couple of games, just kind of show you, give you an expo of some of the matches this deck's played, and kind of the power of it. So what we'll do, first game we'll play is against Johnny Rogue with this deck, and really, his deck inspired me to do this. His deck is more of a creature-based stompy strategy, not a land combo strategy. What you'll see he's playing here is White Weenie. We see land tax, which, we're not extremely happy to see turn 1, because, what this deck does, it just ramps. And we know we're not going to be able to play around this card, and, frankly, we don't care. He can ramp as much as he wants to, but at the end of the day, we know he's going to be playing, like, 3 2s and 2 1s, so we think in our heads, like, hey, it's fine if he gets to tax a couple times, get a better top deck, maybe discard some lands and gain virtual card advantage, but, his lands are not as valuable, in my opinion, as our lands are, because of what we do with them as opposed to what he does with his. As you see, we have Omnath in hand. Not a great draw at the moment. We do have Search for Tomorrow, Option to Bailoff, and this is Pilgrimage. As you'll see, I do not suspend the Search for Tomorrow turn 1. I play on the Veteran Explorer because I see the planes and the land tax. I figure he's an aggressive deck, and I want to ideally block with the Veteran Explorer on his turn so that I get to utilize a full complement of mana on my turn. So he has to pass it back to me. But you'll see us, play it out. We see a threat come down, our correction. We see an Honor of the Pure come out. And we're thinking, okay, maybe it's a token-based strategy. We do suspend at this point in time on the mana ramp. We play our game tree all taps. So we don't have any more lands. Believe right here we play out, our Fire Spout, getting everything. We go up to 5 mana at this point. He does as well. Still hasn't been able to use his tax. Plays on a bunch of small little threats. We ramp with Search Tomorrow at this point in time. We could play on our Omnath here, but keep in mind we want to save Omnath. So we play Bloodbraid like we talked about in the deck tech. We end up finding ramp with it. In this case, it's a Harrow. End up playing on our option of Bailoff. And like I said, although we do have enough mana, if we play our land down at that point in time for Omnath, what we want to do ideally is play Omnath and get value off a land play the same turn we play him. So that's why you'll see us hold him in hand. So at this point in time, we have way more than enough land. This is Renewal, great draw. We know that next turn we play that, we will be able to get a ton of value off Omnath with it. And see Omnath's really able to do some pretty gross things against a small creature-based strategy like this, as 3 damage is generally enough to knock them out. He'll play on a bunch more little creatures, and he'll pass it back to us. We draw a Farseek. I believe we end up casting the Farseek and the Nissa's Renewal. So you see Nissa's Renewal, go up by 26 life, get a ton more tokens, play on our Farseek, and get an additional land, and then we attack him with 10 power. Because of all the first strike he has, these cards really do nothing to the creatures that block them. But we end up sniping away the Anafenza and the Hollow Tree Spirit Keeper. So he only gets 1/2/2 off of that card. He attacks in for 2, passes it back. I believe we draw Scapeshift next, and that's game. And he knows it, so we play it out. I think he waits for us to open up our library, and I think if there's still a bug on Moto, he could see our whole library at that point in time, which, it's smart, but I mean, I think he probably knows what we're up to by this point. When we cast Scapeshift, you generally know you're going to be had by Valakut. So you'll keep in mind, or take note that we do keep our 3 mountains in play. This one doesn't do anything for the Valakut, but I just figured if I find any more mountains off the top, I'd rather just have those. Plus, this is more than enough. So we go to find him, and he concedes at that point in time, knowing that I don't know how many lands that was, but we have something like 10 extra elementals in play, and we're gonna win anyway. So he's at 18 right now, and we have 6 mountains plus the Valakut. Plus the Cinderglade, if I'm not mistaken, which I believe, it works out to 21 damage. Yeah, 6, which would be 18 plus 3 additional, 21 damage off the Valakut, which is going to win right now. And even if it didn't, we have so many 5/5s in play and an Omnath in play that, he cannot Wrath, which I doubt he plays in that deck anyways, and even if he did manage to kill the Omnath, that's just a lot of power to be able to block out with essentially cards that he's playing that really just 1-for-1 with us, whereas like our cards like Omnath, virtually, it depends on what you consider. If you consider a 5/5 a decent card, I kind of do, especially when it's free, it's 0 mana, it's Ornithopter 5/5. It's really acquiring us a lot more value for our mana. All right, so next match, I believe we lose this one, and I can't recall if it's because we failed to find enough lands or what ended up happening this match. First one, no land, pretty much an all-land hand with a kitchen thing, so we know, hey, by turn 3, we can at least put a decent threat into play. Not happy to see him play a Thalia and a Wasteland. I believe we get our Game Trail Wasteland, and yep, puts us back a turn. Can't cast our Rampant Growth, which kind of stinks here. Drawing a decent amount of mountains, which we also don't want to see. We'd rather draw forests. Play our kitchen things, and I believe we get Mana Tide, which is just a beating, because I feel like that card could have really slowed down his beats. Can't cast the Explosive Vegetation here because of Thalia yet again. Cast the Rampant Growth, go up to 5 mana. And by this point, we're pretty sure we're losing once we see the opposing Sovereign. I'm glad he plays that card. I value that card very highly, and I love to see other people who value it too. It's pretty innocuous, but it's strong. And I see the Grafted War Gear, and that's essentially it's a 3-power haste creature, for lack of a better term. And I know the game is over. So, game 3. we saw the power of Thalia and White Weenie, a deck which I affectionately enjoy very much as well. All right, so we have a very strong hand. We have Summoner's Pact. We have the Cultivate, the Valakut. It's whatever. Generally, you don't want to have that in your starter because you don't want to get wastelanded. But we have a Miri's Guile, which we know is going to, find us more mana or mana ramp. So we know we have at least in the bag a Cultivate next turn, which I think you'll see us play. I believe we draw our Nature's Lore off the top, so we know we can ramp to one more the following turn. So we see him play on a very aggressive start. We have 4 power in play on turn 2 for the opponent, which, is good. Don't get me wrong, but, this is not the same start we had before. I'm not as threatened by this. And because of my mana production, and I see a great drop here in Solemn, I'm not too worried. I want him to play this out because I have Dragonlord Atarka in hand, and I can follow that up with a Summoner's Pact to really find my win cons with Primeval Titan. So right now we have the mana to put out the Dragonlord Atarka, block his Figure of Destiny, because if he wants to put the mana into it to make it a 4/4 and kill that thing, I'm fine with that. He does not. He plays out more cards from his hand, which I'm happy to see because, we have Hero Bladehold and Kythian, which both die to Dragonlord Atarka. And Dragonlord Atarka, being an 8/8, very much so blocks out the Knight and the Dog on the opponent's side. Even with Grafted War Gear, adding 3 power to either of them, it's just too damn big. All right, so we see decent cards on top. I believe we take the Sky Shroud Claim right here, because it's essentially, a 2 mana investment for us when we're in this game state. Interestingly enough, I don't know if we could have played it there or not. So we played out the Garrick for 4, untapped 2 mana down. No, we couldn't have quite made it to cast Sky Shroud into Primeval Titan. But once the Primeval Titan comes into play and he sees the Dark Depths, he knows he's got 1 card in hand, and, he can Core Haven my 2020 with me hammered in there with 14 additional power plus a Garrick that can pump everything by +3/+3. He's just not going to last long. I mean, that's not a winning strategy. Especially with every turn Primeval Titans in play, I get closer and closer to having Valakut start becoming effective. Not to mention, if he had passed the turn and equipped Grafted War Gear to get favorable blocks against the Primeval Titan, we have the Reclamation Sage in hand, which is going to nerf the Grafted War Gear, plus get rid of one of his creatures because of the drawback on Grafted War Gear, which says if, Grafted War Gear ever gets detached from a creature, destroy that creature. So that's the end of this match. We ended up taking it 2-1. Very fun match and very well played by Johnny Rogue, and kind of highlights some of the power and the different abilities of the deck. We'll play next a game against our friend Sensei Rob here. Let me make sure this is the right match. Yep, this is it. So, start with a very powerful hand. Let me talk to Keith real fast. Sensei, I believe, kicks it off. He plays a Misty Rainforest. We're happy to see him not play something like, Noble Hierarch. We have a Lotus Cobra. We have 3 lands. But what I'm most happy to see is that we have Crop Rotation and a Worldly Tutor and follow up Wood Elves. So I know with this hand I can make a ton of mana, and I know I have the ability to find the creature that I know will win me the game, which is Primeval Titan. So play my tap land first because I don't really have anything to do turn 1. I think that's the right play. I mean, if he has Wasteland, he has Wasteland, but I'm fine with that. His deck. His decks are typically mid-range 3 or 4 or 5 color decks, which neither lands more than this deck needs its lands. This deck can get more lands if it needs to. So we'll keep playing it. He plays down a Trop Island. I'm curious to see him not play a turn 2. He must have kept a slower hand, maybe more powerful, maybe more permission-based. I figure he's going to counter my Lotus Cobra, but he doesn't, which is, fortuitous. And he plays down an Nissa Vastwood Seer. So to see, we draw a very powerful card in Natural Order, and the game kind of comes off the tracks for him here. And we have an extremely ridiculous turn 3. So we produce our first mana with Lotus Cobra, our first couple mana, play on our Wood Elves, get another land, produce another mana with Lotus Cobra. We Crop Rotation and do another Forest just randomly, and then produce a total of 4 mana, sacking the Wood Elves for Natural Order, finding Primeval Titan, getting the Dark Depths combo, producing 2 more mana, which gives the ability to Worldly Tutor for even another card if we would like. We probably wouldn't have. We probably would have waited until we got to our upkeep, just to play around cards like Jace, or any other random card that could shuffle my deck, like Bribery, etc. But even at this point, if he's going to play Bribery, I'm not hugely worried. I can just attack it with my Primeval Titan and get a card like Homeward Path, and that's going to be that. So, he gives it up on turn 3 of the game because, as you can see, Primeval Titan just wins games. I think it would have been very difficult for him to come back from this position. All right, game 2. Okay, so this is a very, very weird game. So I want to talk this keep first. This is a greedier keep. But the reason I think it's supportable, and actually ends up playing out that it was very supportable, is we have one mountain. If we draw one forest, I think we're set. There are 41 lands to keep in mind in this deck. Because our secure tribal, there are 3 visits, is just really going to set us up. And if we draw a forest, we're good. The reason I think it's defendable on one land is because we have the Firebolt and Lightning Bolt, and we have the Magus, which I know against his mid-range strategies that he plays, I think he plays almost no basics, maybe 1 or 2 in the whole deck. We can just win. And because of the burn, I know any fixing he has early, like Noble Hire, can burn out. So, this is the reason we keep it, and, it ends up biting us a little bit, but I think we get there. We get there as well. So we play this out, Firebolt the card, his card, Noble Hire. We draw another mount, which is not good. We're not happy to be drawing that. Play out the Magus. I figured it's going to get dazed or something. Whatever. Memory lapsed, mana leak, whatever. We end up not drawing lands for a while. Both of us do. As you see, we're just passing it back and forth. We're shooting forked bolts at faces. Not a good situation. So we're both very stalled out. I believe he plays a Morph, which I believe is a Den Protector. I just bolted it as a Den Protector. Draw my first green, 3 visits, find additional forest, play out Sakura, find another mountain, I believe. Because at this point I'm thinking, hey, I'm going to win with Valaga. And keep in mind we have Natural Order as well. I don't want to cast into his open mana, so I just ramp this guy up, force him to play something out. He control magics it, which I'm happy with. I Hull Breach it, then play out my Prime Time. Get the DD combo, or I was planning on getting the DD combo, and or a couple mountains, because at this point, my second mountain, both these mountains are going to do 3 damage to him. So as you can see, Primetime just ends up winning games. Greedier keep on our part, obviously on his as well, but I think ours is justifiable, because there are a lot of forest lands in the deck. I hit one, and the hand just explodes out. Didn't quite play out the way we thought, but because of the protection that we kept in that hand against his mana dorks, we did to get there. So I hope you enjoyed the deck. I hope you enjoyed these couple short videos of this deck that I'm still working on, and I'd be very open and hope that folks in the forum and the 100 Singleton community enjoyed the videos enough and have ideas enough about the deck that they'll offer insights into how they think we could better build this deck. Because again, I think my favorite part of this format is building these decks. Think it's very good. And like I said, I may run it this Saturday. Hope to see everyone there. And if you are not familiar with the tournament I'm talking about the Chainsaw Massacre, a 100-card Singleton event that takes place every Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or 15:30 Eastern Standard Time in the continental United States. It is hosted by ML Berlin. Free tournament, PRE or play run event, hosted on gatherling.com. Again, gatherling.com. So I hope if you're a new player and you've yet to play this great format, you jump onto gatherling.com and check out the Chainsaw Massacre and some of the bannings and rules lists that are involved with it, and I hope you register for it. All right, everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video, and take care.